Fort Hood, Texas. A place built on order, discipline, and routine. A place where thousands of soldiers wake up every day knowing exactly where they need to be and what they need to do. Nothing is supposed to slip through the cracks. Nothing is supposed to go unnoticed. But on April 22nd, 2020, something did. Around noon, a 20-year-old Army soldier named Vanessa Guillen walked into one of the base's arms rooms and then simply vanished. No security camera footage, no recorded exit, no witness who could confidently say they saw her leave. Within hours, her belongings were found neatly placed inside the very room where she worked. Her keys, her ID card, her wallet objects. No soldier would ever abandon unless something was terribly wrong. What happened inside that room? Who was the last person to see her alive? And how can someone disappear inside one of the most secure military bases in the United States? As Vanessa's family rushed toward Fort Hood demanding answers, they were met not with clarity, but with silence, uncertainty, and a creeping fear that grew with every passing hour. Because if a soldier can vanish without a trace behind military gates, then nothing about this mystery is simple, and nothing about what happened next would ever be forgotten. The morning of April 22nd began like any other for Specialist Vanessa Guillen. She woke before sunrise, laced up her boots, tied her dark hair into a tight regulation bun, and headed into another long day with the 3rd Cavalry Regiment at Fort Hood. Vanessa was known as quiet but disciplined, a young Latina soldier with a reputation for outworking almost everyone around her. She dreamed of becoming a military police officer, someone who protected others, someone who made things safer. By late morning, she was assigned to duties inside the regiment's armory, a place she knew like the back of her hand. Concrete floors, metal racks, fluorescent lights humming overhead. It was familiar, predictable, controlled. Soldiers checked weapons in and out. Tools were catalogued, inspected, maintained. Nothing dramatic ever happened in that room. But at 11:30 a.m., Vanessa was spotted walking toward the arms room for the last time. A fellow soldier remembers seeing her enter, holding a clipboard and wearing her standard-issue uniform, sleeves rolled, boots dusty. She seemed focused, no sign of distress, no hesitation, just another task on another day. Then, nothing. Minutes turned into an hour into several. When Vanessa failed to report for afternoon duties, no alarms went off. Some assumed she had stepped away. Others thought she'd been reassigned. On a base as large as Fort Hood, people slip through schedules all the time. It wasn't until a supervisor went looking for her that the first unsettling detail surfaced. Inside the arms room on a metal table lay Vanessa's personal items, her car keys, her barracks key, her wallet, even her military ID. For any civilian, that might seem trivial. But for a soldier, abandoning these items is unthinkable. They are part of identity, part of movement, part of life. On base, a chill rippled through the few who noticed the items lying there. Something felt off, wrong, out of place. But the moment passed quickly, brushed aside by the rigid routine of military structure. No one knew, at least not yet, that this quiet discovery was the first sign of a mystery that would shake the entire country. By late afternoon on April 22nd, the silence from Vanessa felt unusual, at least to the people who knew her best. Her older sister, Mayra, tried calling her several times. No answer. At first, she assumed Vanessa was still on duty. Long shifts weren't new. Missed calls weren't unusual. But something about that day felt different, though Myra couldn't explain why. By early evening, she tried again. Still, nothing. It was around this time that their mother, Gloria, felt a tightening in her chest, a kind of worry that mothers recognize long before the world catches up. She remembered the last conversation she'd had with her daughter, how Vanessa had sounded tired, distracted, as if something weighed heavily on her mind. But Gloria never pushed. Her daughter was a soldier now, and soldiers carried burdens they weren't always allowed to share. When night fell, and Vanessa still hadn't returned any of their calls, The family's concern shifted into fear. "This isn't her," Myra kept repeating. Vanessa was disciplined, responsible, and deeply connected to her family. She always found a way to answer, if not immediately, then eventually. She never let hours go by without a message. So, at 1 a.m., when sleep refused to come, the Guillen family made a decision that would define everything that followed. They got into a car and drove straight to Fort Hood. The highway from Houston to Guillen was long, dark, and quiet. But inside the vehicle, tension pulsed through every mile. The closer they got to the base, the more their fear grew into something sharper, an intuition that whatever had happened wasn't simple, wasn't accidental, wasn't harmless. When they arrived at the gates just before sunrise, they expected clarity. Instead, they were met with clipped answers, vague statements, and an unsettling lack of urgency. A soldier at the gate told them, "She's probably somewhere on base." Another said, "We're looking into it. We're looking into it. We're looking into it." No one provided a timeline. No one mentioned her abandoned belongings. And as the sun began to rise over Fort Hood, the Guillen family realized something chilling. They were more worried than the people who were supposed to be looking for her. When the Guillen family stepped inside Fort Hood, they expected a coordinated search already underway. Instead, they found scattered efforts, fragmented communication, and a strange sense that no one fully understood nor urgently cared about the gravity of the situation. One officer explained that Vanessa had been off duty for a while, though he couldn't specify how long. Another insisted she might have left the building voluntarily. A third hinted she could be with friends. Every answer contradicted the last, and the more they asked, the more the timeline of Vanessa's disappearance began to unravel. According to base records, Vanessa had been scheduled for multiple duties that afternoon, but no one could confirm whether she ever showed up. Some claimed they saw her earlier, others said they hadn't seen her at all that day. A supervisor mentioned she might have stepped out to handle something, but couldn't say where or when. And then came the most troubling detail of all. Hours had passed before anyone even noticed she was missing. On a civilian job, that might be understandable. But inside a military installation, one of the largest in the country, every movement is supposed to be accounted for. Soldiers check in, check out, report, and respond. Order is the very foundation of the system. Yet somehow, an entire afternoon had slipped away without a single documented trace of Vanessa's presence. Myra pressed the officers. Where was she last seen? Who spoke to her? Who reported her missing? Most questions were answered with shrugs or reassurances that someone was looking into it. When she asked whether the security cameras had captured Vanessa leaving the building, the response was even more baffling. There's no footage. Maybe the angle didn't cover that area. The cameras weren't recording at that moment. 3 explanations. None of them reassuring. The family felt the weight of an unspoken truth. The first 24 hours, the most critical window in any missing person case, had already been lost. And instead of clarity, every minute brought more confusion, more contradictions, more doubt. As they walked through the corridors of Fort Hood, the Guillens couldn't escape a chilling question. Was their daughter truly missing? Or was someone hiding the truth about what happened to her? As the search widened, so did the number of stories swirling around Fort Hood, each one painting a slightly different picture of Vanessa's final hours. Soldiers who barely spoke to each other on a normal day suddenly had opinions, memories, or half-remembered details, and every new detail only deepened the mystery. One private claimed he had seen Vanessa walking across the motor pool earlier than the official timeline suggested. Another insisted she'd been in a different building that morning. A third said he remembered hearing an argument, muffled voices coming from the direction of the arms room, but admitted he wasn't sure of the time. None of the accounts matched. None of them aligned with the base's records, and all of them raised more questions than answers. Inside the unit, whispers began to travel faster than facts. Some soldiers quietly mentioned tension between Vanessa and a male co-worker. Others said she'd been upset for days. Withdrawn. More serious than usual. A female soldier confided off the record that Vanessa had spoken about someone bothering her, though she never said who. Still, the army insisted there was no evidence of foul play. But the rumors didn't stop. One soldier recalled hearing something heavy drop in the arms room that afternoon, followed by a strange silence. Another described seeing a male specialist pacing outside the building, looking pale and nervous. When questioned, he dismissed it as stress. The Guillen family felt the shift immediately. Every time a soldier hesitated before speaking, every time an officer deflected a question, it fed their suspicion that something inside Fort Hood was being held back or deliberately obscured. Myra later described the atmosphere as thick with fear, not fear of an external threat, but fear of saying the wrong thing. As unofficial rumors collided with official statements, the base seemed to fracture into two realities. One presented to the public, neat and controlled, and one beneath the surface, unstable and unsettling. And in the middle of that divide stood the unanswered question that haunted the family most. Why were there so many versions of Vanessa's last moments? Yet not a single one led to her. As investigators stumbled over inconsistent timelines and half-formed testimonies, the Guillen family pressed harder for answers. But each meeting with army officials left them more frustrated, more convinced that the truth was being filtered, maybe even softened, before reaching them. It was during one of those tense conversations that Vanessa's mother, Gloria, revealed something she had held inside for months. Mi hija tenía miedo, she said quietly. My daughter was afraid. Vanessa had confided, in brief and fragile sentences, that she was being harassed on base. She never named the soldier. She never described the details. But the fear was unmistakable in her voice, the kind of fear that makes a person speak in fragments instead of full stories. Myra remembered the moment her sister hinted at the same thing. They had been talking late one night when Vanessa paused, hesitated, and finally said, "Someone is bothering me at work." When Myra pressed for a name, Vanessa shut down. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want retaliation. She didn't want to be labeled. Inside the military, speaking up can sometimes mean more consequences for the victim than the offender. Vanessa knew that, and she carried that burden alone. But now that she was missing, the secret she had tried to protect became the center of everything. As news of the harassment claim rippled through the base, soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Women in the unit began quietly acknowledging that harassment was not uncommon, but rarely reported. A few admitted they, too, stayed silent out of fear. Not of the perpetrators, but of the system. The army responded quickly and firmly. There is no evidence Vanessa was sexually harassed. There are no official reports. We cannot confirm these allegations. But outside Fort Hood, the public heard something very different. A young Latina soldier had told her family she was afraid, and weeks later, she vanished. Protesters began gathering at the gates. Handmade signs appeared. Protect our soldiers. Justice for Vanessa. Believe. Women in uniform. Believe. The story was no longer just about a missing soldier. It had become a national reckoning, a spotlight on a system many felt had failed her. And for the Guillen family, the question sharpened into something painful and personal. Had someone hurt Vanessa because she was planning to speak up? As the harassment allegations spread and pressure mounted, Fort Hood finally launched a large-scale search effort, one that looked impressive on the surface, but felt strangely hollow to those closest to Vanessa. Soldiers combed through open fields under the scorching Texas sun. K-9 units swept wooded areas and drainage ditches. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades chopping through the thick summer air. Drones scanned stretches of land, extending miles beyond the base. Volunteers, civilian and military, joined in, walking side by side through brush and mud, calling Vanessa's name. But despite the massive effort, not a single trace emerged. No discarded clothing, no footprints, no personal items, nothing. It was as if she had been erased. The Guillen family walked every step they could alongside volunteers, refusing to be passive observers. But with each new search zone, they noticed something unsettling behind the scenes. Some officers avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped abruptly when the family passed, and updates from command often felt incomplete, like summaries rather than the full picture. One soldier quietly admitted, "We should have started this sooner. Hours matter." Another whispered, "People here are scared to talk." Then came a statement from Fort Hood leadership that struck the family like ice. "There is no reason to suspect foul play." How could that be? A soldier had vanished. Her belongings were left behind. Her family had reported harassment. Rumors of conflict circulated inside the unit. The timeline was full of contradictions. Yet somehow, the official stance remained: no foul play. The disconnect between what was being said publicly and what people whispered privately was widening into a canyon. Reporters began gathering at the gates. Cameras rolled. Questions grew louder. Why were there no leads? Why was the army dismissing harassment claims so quickly? Why did everything inside Fort Hood feel guarded? For the Guillen family, the message was painfully clear. The search for Vanessa was happening out in the open, but the truth, whatever it was, remained locked behind doors they couldn't open. As public pressure intensified and inconsistencies piled up, investigators quietly began re-examining everyone who had interacted with Vanessa on the day she disappeared. Among the long list of soldiers, one name kept resurfacing: Specialist Aaron David Robinson. At first glance, Robinson seemed unremarkable. A 20-year-old soldier assigned to the same unit. Someone who worked inside the arms room that very day. He was neither close to Vanessa nor openly hostile. But the more investigators looked, the more troubling details emerged. Robinson's timeline was filled with gaps. His statements shifted from interview to interview, and several soldiers mentioned seeing him acting strangely that afternoon, pacing, sweating, avoiding conversation. One soldier recalled asking Robinson if he had seen Vanessa. He just shrugged, the soldier said. Didn't even look up. It was weird. Another noticed him leaving the arms room, carrying a large, heavy case typically used for equipment transport. When asked later what was inside, Robinson said it was just tools. But no one could verify that. When investigators pulled his phone records, they found a series of rapid calls, some to his girlfriend, others to numbers that seemed unrelated to his duties. The pattern suggested urgency or panic, yet officially, Robinson remained a soldier, cooperating with the investigation. Unofficially, his shadow was beginning to stretch across every unanswered question. Meanwhile, inside the unit, the atmosphere shifted. Soldiers lowered their voices when discussing him. Some avoided giving statements altogether, afraid of being tied to whatever was unfolding. Others admitted they didn't trust the system to protect them if they spoke frankly. And when the Guillen family asked army officials whether anyone was being investigated as a suspect, they were told, no. There are no suspects at this time, but whispers told a different story. A female soldier quietly told Myra, "There are things happening here you wouldn't believe." Another said, "If they don't look at him at Robinson, they'll never find her." The pressure mounted until investigators finally arranged a more formal interview with Robinson. But instead of easing suspicion, the conversation deepened it. He appeared calm, too calm, his answers rehearsed, his demeanor detached, almost uninterested. And in that moment, one thing became clear. The puzzle surrounding Vanessa's disappearance was no longer just a mystery. It was beginning to look like a cover-up, with Robinson standing at the center of it. On the morning of June 30th, more than 2 months after Vanessa vanished, a group of contractors working near the Leon River in rural Bell County stumbled upon something unusual, something wedged beneath a thicket of brush and debris, half buried in the soil. At first, they thought it was discarded trash. Then one of them noticed the unmistakable shape of human remains. The sheriff's office was called immediately. Soon the area was crawling with investigators wearing gloves, masks, and grim expressions. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind, boots pressed quietly into the damp earth. No one spoke louder than a whisper. The scene was so remote, so hidden, so deliberate, that even seasoned officers felt a chill. Within hours, word began to circulate first internally, then to the media. Possible human remains found. When the Guillen family heard the news, the world seemed to tilt. They rushed toward the site, desperate for information, but authorities kept them behind a perimeter. All they could do was stand in the punishing Texas heat, staring into a line of trees and brush where strangers combed the shadows for pieces of the truth. And there were pieces. The remains were not intact. They had been dismembered, burned, attempted to be concealed. It was an unbearable, unspeakable sight even for investigators trained to detach. Back at Fort Hood, soldiers exchanged horrified glances. The rumors had been dark before, but now they took on a new dimension, one rooted in fear and disbelief. How could something so brutal happen to one of their own? And how could it happen without anyone noticing? Meanwhile, the army insisted the remains couldn't yet be confirmed as Vanessa's, but the family felt it in their bones. Gloria collapsed into her daughter's arms, crying, "Es ella. Lo siento mucho. It's her. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." As forensic teams worked late into the night, detectives began to question one thing, above all. If someone had gone to such lengths to destroy evidence, then what exactly had happened in that arms room on April 22nd? And more importantly, who had helped cover it up? As investigators processed the remains found near the Leon River, attention turned sharply and urgently towards specialist Aaron Robinson. What had once been a cloud of suspicion was now a flashing red alarm. Detectives moved fast. Interviews, surveillance, monitoring his movements. Robinson was no longer cooperating. He was being watched. But on the night of July 1st, before investigators could bring him in for formal questioning, something unexpected happened. Robinson fled. He slipped away from the base under the thin cover of darkness. Nearly the entire investigative team described the moment as a break in the dam, the instant when every suspicion hardened into certainty. Police were notified immediately. A bolo went out. Patrol cars swept through Guillen. Helicopters circled overhead. Just after midnight, Robinson was spotted walking along a road not far from the base. Officers approached cautiously, weapons drawn, ordering him to stop. Instead, Robinson reached into his waistband, pulled out a handgun, and before anyone could react, shot himself. The case shifted in an instant from pursuit to aftermath. A key suspect was gone, but the truth wasn't buried with him. Because somewhere else in the city, detectives were questioning the one person who might still hold the full story. Robinson's girlfriend, Cecily Aguilar. What began as hesitance quickly cracked under pressure. Within hours, Aguilar unraveled a confession so gruesome, so incomprehensible, that seasoned investigators had to pause their recording equipment just to process the words. According to her statement, Robinson had attacked Vanessa inside the arms room, striking her repeatedly with a hammer. He then stuffed her body into a large container, transported it off base, and later returned with Aguilar to dispose of the remains. Together, they attempted to dismember and burn the body in an effort to erase all evidence. Every detail was worse than the last. Every sentence deepened the horror. When the Guillen family was informed, Gloria collapsed again, her cries echoing across the hospital room where they had gathered to hear the official confirmation. Myra clenched her fists so tightly her nails dug into her skin. No one could comprehend the brutality not just of the act, but of the betrayal. A fellow soldier, someone sworn to protect their country, had become the monster her sister feared. For the public, the case changed overnight. This was no longer a disappearance. It was a murder, one hidden behind military walls, shrouded in silence, and nearly lost to time. And yet, even with a confession, one question remained. How did something this horrific happen inside a U.S. Army base, without anyone stopping it? In the weeks following the confirmation of Vanessa's death, grief spread far beyond her family. Across the country, people who had never met her gathered in parks, outside courthouses, on military bases, and in front of the U.S. Capitol holding candles, signs, and flowers. Vanessa Guillen, had become more than a missing soldier. She had become a symbol. Her story ignited a wave of voices that had been quiet for too long. Women in uniform began stepping forward, some publicly, others anonymously, sharing stories of harassment, intimidation, and silence. Their messages flooded social media. I am Vanessa Guillen. This happened to me too. We deserve better. For the first time in decades, the American public looked closely at how the military handled sexual misconduct. Lawmakers took notice. Activists rallied. Journalists dug deeper. What started as a family desperately searching for their daughter became a national reckoning. And then, something unprecedented happened. Congress introduced the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act, a sweeping reform designed to remove sexual harassment and assault investigations from a soldier's direct chain of command, an effort advocates had been fighting for years. Vanessa's name, her life and death became the force strong enough to shift federal policy. At Fort Hood, memorials grew along fences and sidewalks. Posters, letters, uniforms, photos of a young woman whose smile now symbolized both tragedy and change. Soldiers who had once walked past each other without a word now exchanged nods, acknowledging the deep fracture her story had revealed. For the Guillen family, the pain never faded. But they stood on stages, spoke into microphones, met lawmakers, and turned their grief into movement. Vanessa's mother, through tears, often said, "My daughter wanted to serve her country, and now she is helping change it." Vanessa did not receive justice in time to save her life, but her legacy reshaped a system. Her voice, silenced in that arms room, echoed through the halls of Congress, the Pentagon, and across America. And because of her, countless others may finally be heard. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. Stories like Vanessa's are never easy to hear, but they matter because every missing person deserves to be searched for, every voice deserves to be heard, and every truth deserves to come to light, no matter how long it takes or how painful it is. If this episode moved you, if it made you think, or if you believe stories like Vanessa's should never be forgotten, please take a moment to like this video. It helps these stories reach more people who care. And if you want to continue exploring the mysteries, disappearances, and human stories that shape our country, we invite you to subscribe to Vanished in America Story. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for listening, and until the next case, stay safe, stay aware, and take care of one another.